Welcome to the Live Like It's True podcast. Here on the show, my guests and I talk through some of the most interesting and astonishing stories of the Bible. And then we ask, how can we live like this story is true? I'm your host, Shannon Pepkin. I am an author, a speaker, and a Bible teacher. And here on the podcast, I'm inviting you to think of these stories in the Bible as containers for truth. Each one gives you a new way to reject the lies, to rehearse the truth, and to invite other people to do the same. So I hope that this episode is going to inspire you to better know the story, share the story, and live like the story is true. I am so excited to have Rachel Wojo here with us today. Rachel is an author, a speaker, and a podcaster. She blogs at rachelwojo.com. And through Rachel's biblical approach and personal life experiences, she empowers women to discover strength and hope in everyday situations. We're going to be talking today about her brand new book, Desperate Prayers. So if that's you, I'm excited that you're here with us. And Rachel, welcome to Live Like It's True.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Shannon. I really appreciate all the work that you are doing on your podcast. You do an incredible job, and I know your listeners are blessed.
Well, we're blessed to have you with us today. This is going to be a good conversation. So I just wondered, we're going to be talking about Hannah, and she is a mother who is praying. Well, she's not a mother yet, praying a desperate prayer. But I just wondered if you could give us a peek into your world as a mom. I know you have 6 kids, and I know you've lost one of them. 2? Maybe a miscarriage, but then you lost an adult child too. So tell us a little bit about your experience as a mom.
Yeah. So what a bustling household we still have. We have 5 at home currently and 1 living next door. Our oldest daughter, who is my stepdaughter, lives next door to us with her husband. And then in the house, we have 22, 20, 19, 15, and 13.
Whoa. Wow.
They are, I know you know. They are busy kiddos, all some starting to spread their wings.
Yeah, it's that when I hear those ages, that's what I'm thinking. Like,
right.
It's just a whole different experience parenting young adult children, right?
Right.
Because it's just all the tension of like, wait, who am I in this situation? Am I still the parent, or am I more like a coach, or am I just like, I don't know, here to pay the bills and feed you dinner?
Right? Yeah, exactly that. Our 22-year-old is getting ready to get married in the spring. And so that's a whole thing going on. I had the privilege of going with his bride-to-be last week to pick out her dress. And it was such a sweet experience. So there are still beautiful blessings along the way of parenting children as they grow into adulthood. We do have a busy, bustling household. Has always been this way since I began having children. You mentioned that I lost a daughter who's 22 years old on January 2nd, 2019. She had lived with a rare metabolic disorder her entire life, and so that shaped our lives in many ways. Our adult children now were shaped very early on by having a special needs sister. And so it's a different kind of dynamic, I think, when you have lived life a certain way for so long. And then when that pressing need is gone, you almost feel guilty for some of the relief. Mm-hmm. So a gamut of emotions. I guess that's why I relate to Hannah so much.
Oh, for sure. For sure. So what were her special needs? Like, I think you mentioned.
She was born with a rare disease. We did not know it at her birth that she had this disease. Okay. The panels showed that she had a hearing loss of some type, but we didn't know until she actually started to lose skills. One day at the age of 3, she sat down to put her socks on, and I came back and she was still sitting there. And I said, Taylor, put your socks on. Prompted her again a little. And she had been dressing herself for a little while. So she looked at her socks and she looked at me, and I knew that she didn't know how to put her socks on. And so that plunged me as her mama into a journey of figuring out exactly what was wrong with her. And it took a little while, about 18 months, before we received her full diagnosis. But mucopolysaccharidosis is a rare genetic disorder. It's a lysosomal storage disease. So everything that you eat consists of long-chain sugar molecules. And in her body, what is missing to chemically break down those molecules is not there. The gene that she needs to produce what is needed chemically is not there. And so what happens is the body stores those chemicals. They attach themselves to the connections between the nerves and cause nerve damage. And gradually, as you can imagine, your whole body is a connection of nerves, right? It's a neuro pathway. And I imagine this like a map where you have these detour signs that keep getting put up all across the map. And eventually the pathways stop working altogether because there's no other place to go. And so that sort of puts it on everyday terms. Some have called it a childhood Alzheimer's. It really is a childhood dementia where every skill is gradually lost. So that path of urgency and desiring God to do something in circumstances that are outside of control, I think that path is why I relate to Hannah so much.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned control, and that's what I'm thinking. That I have wrestled with control, have written about that topic a lot, and I can only imagine a 3-year-old where you had maybe grappled with the hearing loss, but that's pretty minimal compared to this rare disease, and just watching control just slip out of your fingers.
Yeah.
And then what do you do with that? I think that's really a pivotal question, especially for women, because I make the case in Control Girl that we all are daughters of Eve, and we all have this desire to reach out and pluck that fruit and do what we think is best for our family and for ourselves and for all the people that we love, and putting fruit into people's hands, like the way that we see it, rather than trusting God and the way that He sees it, His perspective. And so I can only imagine that grappling. Where is she in birth order? Was she your oldest?
She was my first child. Yeah, she was my first. So apparently God believed I had a lot of lessons to learn before I had any other. No, I say that tongue in cheek. I don't really believe that. But I can imagine, though, if you've written a lot about control, I hear you saying that we all feel that desire to be in control. And it actually brings me comfort that I'm not the only one, because I'm so tempted to just, in any situation, I have strong administrative skills, and I just tend to sweep in and take over and, get the job done kind of person. And so with that drive and personality came a lot of lessons that the Lord wanted to teach me.
I can only imagine. I have some of those skills myself. And when I'm faced with the thing that is out of my control, I just want to clamp tighter and dig my heels in, and I want to find all the information. If it's out of my control, I want to get it back into my control. And that just produces in me such anxiety and fear. Anxiety about the things that I see, but fear about the unknowns in the future, right? And then anger. Anger is often me reacting to the things that I can't control, or wanting to control the things that I can't control. And, and perfectionism too. All of these, I see these as little dashboard indicators that are tied to this deeper desire that we as women have for control. And the reason that I am seeing women in particular is because of God's words to Eve. Your desire will be, it means your desire will be to control your husband. That's the New Living Translation. This is our consequence. And we don't have to live in that consequence. We have an escape hatch toward freedom. Jesus is our way to be completely remade into different women. And yet we see such commonality. And so as a young mom with a 3-year-old, did you pray desperate prayers at that point? Like, is this book, Desperate Prayers, is this somewhat, rooted in your own story?
I am so amazed that you picked the word rooted there, because that was the word that was coming to my mind as you were talking. Absolutely, yes. I struggled so much with letting go of that control and trying to figure out what God's plan was, and even manipulate his plan, like so many characters in the Bible, come up with some other option. And I think sometimes he puts us in those places where we don't have the control, and we never will have it. And he puts us there in order to teach us lessons that we otherwise wouldn't have learned.
Yeah.
And I just know the kind of person that I was before I had Taylor, and the kind of mother and the kind of person I became after I had Taylor. And especially over the course of years, even early on, I look at how I processed and how I dealt with so many different situations. And the one thing that I did do right, Shannon, was I just kept going to God, because I didn't know what else to do.
And
so, yeah.
That is pivotal, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we can try, and when I wrote Control Girl, I studied 7 controlling women of the Bible, and most of them did the opposite of going to God,
Right.
at least in the beginning. And the only way that any of them ever found any peace or security or joy or hope was in surrendering control. And so that's what I imagine was the transformative process that I hear you talking about in your own life. Was it surrendering? Was it giving control to God? And how did prayer play into that?
I think that prayer was the thing. Initially, I was not surrendered at all. I will just tell you, I was mad at God. I was frustrated at God. I, for a while, kept him at arm's length and wanted him close enough to where I could run to him if something really came about. But generally speaking, I wasn't having conversations with him because I was angry at him. But gradually, I began to take that anger and take those feelings to the Lord. He was working on my heart, and I knew him from the time that I was a child. And so I listened to those whispers of the Holy Spirit when I would read the Bible or when I would show up at church for a message. And I never missed church. There was something about that ingrained in me as a child that even when I was mad at God, I still went to church every week. And so that allowed his spirit to really speak into me. But I would say that time in my life was such a long journey. Even some people say, why do you have so many years between your books? Because One More Step was written in 2015, it released. And this new book did not release until this fall. And so 9 years between books is a really long time. Most people maybe wouldn't write a second book after that length of time, or maybe the average person is like, well, you should be writing 1 book a year as a writer. But in my life, a lot of life has had to happen, and I've had to live those messages before I could write about them.
What would change in your life if you lived like it's true that God is the one who's in control, not you? In a 9-week study called Control Girl, Lessons on Surrendering Your Burden of Control from 7 Women in the Bible, we'll examine the Old Testament stories of Eve, Sarah, Hagar, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, and Miriam. And here's what I think you'll notice. All of these women were trying to white-knuckle their way to a happy ending just like we do. But as you examine their stories, here's what I think will bring you so much peace and perspective and security in your own life. You're going to see in 100 different ways that in their stories and in yours, God already is in control, which means that you don't have to be. If you're interested in using this study for your small group or your women's Bible study or just individually, I'd love for you to check out the Leader's Guide, free bonuses, and other things we have for you at controlgirl.com.
Yeah. Well, and I think it'll be a better, more well-developed message because of those. I mean, I think often books are written prematurely, right? Mm-hmm. Either the message isn't fully developed or it hasn't been lived, right? And I think what a beautiful thing to have a book that has been lived for 9 years.
You ask about prayer and what that played in the role of all of that. When I got to the point to where I was ready to write another book and I felt like God was working in me to do that, I said, Lord, what do you want this to be about? Mm-hmm. And his reply back was, that's what I want it to be about. I want it to be about your conversations with me and how you have journeyed through learning how to have open, honest conversation all the time. So I hope that answers the question well.
Oh, it does. So just tell me first how the book is arranged, and then we're going to dive into one of these prayers, these desperate prayers from this woman named Hannah.
Yeah. So the subtitle is Embracing the Power of Prayer in Life's Darkest Moments. And if you're listening now, you've either been through a dark moment or you're going through a dark moment or you're about to go through something. And so I feel like all of us can relate to that subtitle. But the part I really wanted to emphasize is that we have this incredible opportunity to embrace that power. And it opens up, our desperate pleas open up a powerful pathway to peace. So in each chapter, there are 15 chapters in this book, and in each chapter, I dive into one Bible character per chapter, and I assign a 3-word prayer to that Bible character. So for instance, God help me, God heal me, God hold me, God fill me. And so there are 15 short 3-word prayers that encapsulate what that Bible character was going through. And so for Hannah, the one that we are talking about today, that subtitle is God Remember Me. And some people get confused about this. Did God forget? They think, well, God's forgotten me. And then you read language that says, God remember me, or we read the English versions and we get a little confused thinking, well, God needed a reminder. But that really isn't what this prayer is. It's God, make a memorial of me. God, I want to yield myself to you and glorify you. So use this to glorify you, whatever, your situation is. In Hannah's, it was infertility. She was saying, turn this thing around so that I can praise you about it. Mm-hmm. And so the book itself, I think, just guides us through those prayers and encourages between the Bible stories and our family's personal stories, encourages you to focus on each chapter on a 3-word prayer that will hopefully move your prayer life forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love those 3-word prayers. I do. And just, I think those are memorable. It's a great way to encapsulate these stories because even as I was reading through the list of them, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that prayer. I remember that person. I remember that story. Mm-hmm. And so the first part of 1 Samuel 1 just kind of sets up the problem in Hannah's life.
Right.
And it's rooted in polygamy, which not a fan. I don't think I would do well in a polygamous marriage, Rachel. But this was accepted in their culture, even among God's people. It's it's descriptive, not prescriptive. We should not adopt this in our Christian homes. But there's this man named Elkanah. Is that how you would say it? Elkanah, who has 2 wives, Hannah and Peninnah. Hannah's the one that he loves, and Peninnah's the one having babies. And I'm sure that was hurtful to Peninnah also, to be the one who was not loved. They would travel to the temple in Shiloh every year and sacrifice to the Lord. And so when they would sacrifice, there would be a feast afterward, and this man, Elkanah, would give double portions to Hannah. So fill her plate double full. Like, I don't know. There's just something about those visual reminders that somebody else is the favorite. And so every year this would go on. And I think it's interesting that Peninnah would torture Hannah during this time. I'll just read the verse. It says, and her rival, Peninnah, used to provoke her grievously to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. So Peninnah is like rubbing salt in the wound. The wound is that Hannah has not been able to have children, and Peninnah is like pressing on that sore place in her life. And it happens annually at this sacrifice. Every year they go to Shiloh. And I think, there is something about painful reminders that come on the calendar year. You know what I mean? Like, I wonder if you had any of that with your loss, with your daughter. Is there something about the calendar year where even you're anticipating maybe the day of her death or Christmas? Is there anything about that annual pain?
Well, thank you for bringing that up in this conversation, because I do have one little spot that has always been hard for me, because Taylor's death is January 2nd, 2019. And one time I was reading a book about grief. And, I've read probably over 50 books on grief, but I was really enjoying this particular book. And I got to the end, and she talks about the holiday season and how difficult it is for so many people, and how so many who have lost a number of loved ones, or who have lost a loved one around the holiday, they wish they could just skip from Thanksgiving to after New Year's. A lot of them, like, we could just forgo this time. And I've never been that way, but when I was reading that particular book, I never wanted to skip, maybe because I feel like I have so much else to live for. God has just given me that ability not to get stuck in that place. But when I was reading that book that particular day, she said in her writing, she said, I often wished I could just skip to January 2nd. And so it was like a knife went in my heart. And I thought, lady, you've just written a whole book about grief. And at the end here, I know that the enemy was just trying to twist this in my mind and use it to say, oh, but she doesn't know January 2nd is the day you wish you could get past. And so in that moment, I thought, you know what? All of us have those days, what you just mentioned. All of us have some day that we wish we could pass over, skip over, whether it's a holiday season or whether it is maybe just that particular season, that those reminders of what the season was like up to the time that you lost your loved one, or you experienced that heartache, or you got the diagnosis, whatever it is. So I do think that we can all relate to Hannah in that way.
Yes. Well, and this author didn't intend harm or pain. And I see a parallel in Hannah's husband, because he turns to her and he's like, Hannah, because she can't eat. She's anxious. She can't eat. This comes every year at this point. And he says to her, Hannah, why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons? And it's like, oh my goodness, the misunderstanding in those words. Why? He couldn't possibly understand, because he is a man with 2 wives.
Right.
and he doesn't understand what it feels like to be one of those wives who can't bear him children. And it's great to have his love, but I just think there is something about, nobody else can understand why they or something else can't fill the void of this other thing, this other loss, this other longing.
We know he was trying hard too.
It wasn't like it was a good-hearted. Exactly.
It says he was giving her double the portion, and because he loved her. And I think, maybe he thought that gift giving was her love language.
Yeah.
And it wasn't filling her up, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't doing what she needed it to. But then I often think sometimes we look at these questions in the Bible, and like for him, he asked 4 questions in a row. Okay, so if we apply that to our own behaviors, typically, if we're rattling off 4 questions in a row, it means our emotions are at a high, right? Mm. So we know that he probably didn't gently take her to the side and hold her hand and look her in the eye and say, "Oh, Hannah," that's probably not what he was doing at this point. His emotions were just like exasperated with her behaviors. And so, when someone tells you not to cry, what happens? You cry harder. Right. So I doubt that her response was exactly what he was looking for.
That's so true. And I mean, I love that you pointed that out. 4 questions in a row are not information seeking, right? Mm-hmm. He's not asking why, hoping to understand. He's asking why. It's provocative. It's like he's exasperated. And so this is just adding insult to injury. Mm-hmm. It's like this poor woman, she's probably been dreading this trip. It happens every time. She gets the double portion on her plate, and then Peninnah starts, jazzing her about and the reason back in verse 6 of 1 Samuel 1 is the reason that she irritates her is because the Lord had closed her womb. Maybe she's saying, why hasn't God given you children? Why does he give me babies and not you? Like, what is it? Is there something going on here? Something we don't know about you, Hannah? Or she doesn't know why the Lord has closed her womb. Right. And neither does Peninnah, but there seems to be some connection with the way that Peninnah is provoking her and this fact that God has closed her womb, or just infertility in general. But the beauty of the story is what Hannah does with all of this provocation and grief and struggle and pain, because so many times we see people doing exactly the opposite of what Hannah does. Right. In fact, there is another story in the Bible where Rachel is in exactly the same situation. It's kind of interesting. She also is married to a man who has 2 wives. And she also is the one that her husband loves, and the other wife is having the babies. And there also is this rivalry, which no surprise, but Rachel doesn't do what Hannah does. Here's what Rachel does. She goes to her husband, and I almost picture her with her hands around his neck saying, "Give me children or I will die," right? She turns everywhere but to God. There's idolatry in so many different scenes in Rachel's life. Rachel's trying to control everything. She's turning to herself and what she can control and what these idols in her life can give her. Jacob is an idol. Sex is an idol. The mandrakes are an idol. And in another scene, we see her sitting on the household gods of her father, like she steals the idols and she's sitting on them. And so there's never a point in Rachel's story where she turns to God. Her story is very unfulfilling. It's one of those that I studied in Control Girl. But Hannah, what a beautiful contrast. Hannah does not turn to control. She's not wringing anybody's neck. She's going to God in her grief with her desperate prayers. And so next, what we're going to see is Hannah going where Rachel didn't. She went directly to the temple and she cries out to God. She pours out her heart to the Lord, and she tells the Lord, look, if you will remember me, if you will give me a son, then I will give this son back to you, which is just astounding to me. Rachel, is it not?
Yes, that she could be so God-oriented in that moment. Like she had taken the focus off of herself and said, "I want this to be for you, Lord."
Yeah. And so we're going to have to pick this conversation up next time, because there's just too much to unpack, and I don't want to cut it short. And I want our listeners to be able to listen through to the end. But we've talked about how there are those times on the calendar where we're grieving, and there are times that people don't understand, and they say things that are provocative in our grief and in our loss and in these out of control situations. Give us a time that you went to the Lord in your desperate prayer over your daughter, and that was helpful to you in some way.
Oh, yeah. So I do remember that one particular day where she had just finished having seizures and had finally come to a point of rest. And the seizures were every day, often multiple times a day, uncontrolled by medication. And I just remember sitting at the edge of her bed, wishing that we could be outside. I was looking at this beautiful sunny day, and so many days we had spent, going in the stroller and walking around the neighborhood, looking at the flowers or going to the park. And this particular day, I wished we could have our walk. And I was so angry at her suffering. And I said to God, I just wish that we could be outside. It's such a beautiful day. I just wish that we could be outside. And I remember the Holy Spirit speaking to my heart and saying, you can wish you were outside, or you can be grateful for the sunshine that's coming through the window. Mm-hmm. And just that perspective shift, I think, is what you're talking about. The difference between Rachel and Hannah was that perspective shift of mm-hmm. how do I choose to look at this issue, this hard space, because it doesn't change just because we're looking at it differently, mm-hmm. but it changes how we process and how we're able to effectively help others. So I think that was one example. And then one more example that's coming to my mind is I just remember being so upset and saying to the Lord, you don't know what it's like to watch your child suffer and die. And his response back to me was, oh, yes, I do. I watched my son suffer and die for you. Mm-hmm. And so again, just that deep communication with the Lord was the fuel that enabled me to shift perspective and to say, God's love is, if my human love for my child could be this deep and this great, imagine God's great love for us. And so that's how prayer is transforming. That power transforms us from the inside out.
Yeah, looking at the perspective. I mean, in both of those situations, you're inviting God to give you his perspective on your story, which, like you said, Rachel didn't do that. When she had her baby Joseph, she looked into his little face and she named him Joseph, which means may he add. And so she's all about her perspective. She's like, yeah, God, thanks for this one. And I need another one too, because she is all about trying to win the birth wars with her sister. The text says that when her servant has a baby, she's like, I have won the mighty wrestlings, with my sister. I have won. It's like, it's for her. It was all about winning. It was all about her little small-minded perspective of her little life and, getting out in the sunshine and having things go her way and filling, her baby stroller with the child that she wants. But God wants to give us his perspective, which is so much richer and more fulfilling than if we could manage our little lives. Like if I could control my life, Rachel, I would want just one happy scene after another. I'd want it to be like, those little chunky board books that they give little toddlers. Like that's what I would want for my life story. One sunny page after another, the end, get to the, like, I wouldn't want the plot line, but in that story, I wouldn't be looking to God. It's just all about me and my perspective.
Right.
And God's perspective on our story is this. He did give his son, right? He did empty his arms of his son. So he knows what it's like to not have, your arms full, not have your life full, to be laying down his son. Yeah, he does know what that feels like. And so when we go to him in our desperate prayers, like all of this desperation, what it has to do with is this broken world. In your title, it talks about darkest moments. We live in this dark age, and this world is so dark. There is so much hurt and pain and struggle, and our God knows that.
Yeah.
And how did he respond to it? Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus, who is going to set everything right. Yeah. Jesus, who was born to a woman and who experienced all of the human condition, up close and personal, and yet chose to go to that cross so that he could redeem back for us all that has been lost, all that has been sucked into the darkness, all of the disease, all of the brokenness, all of the the paninas in our life who are provoking us, or the misunderstanding and the mistreatment, all of that he came to redeem. And I always say, I think it's helpful for us to read the story backward. Like, let's look at the end of the story and not misjudge where we are in this place on the timeline. Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, Rachel, could you give us one way to live like this story is true?
I think that when we look at Hannah's prayer life and we look at, what truth is in this nugget of this Bible story, what truth really digs us out of the hole, and how can we live it out? And I think it's just that simple choosing to go to God in prayer at the first sign of distress. And it almost seems so basic, right? But I really believe that can be the turning point for many of us in whether or not we wind up wallowing in bitterness, or, it gives us a way to process our grief. It's not that it removes it, but it does provide us with that incredible peace that we're looking for. And so hopefully that encourages someone today to know that when you go to God in prayer, he is looking for you. He's longing to communicate with you, and things can change and happen because of your prayers.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. Thank you. So, Rachel, where can our guests find Desperate Prayers?
Sure. If you go to desperateprayers.com, you'll find the book there, as well as many other resources, a discussion guide, when you can't pray, prayer guide, and most effectively, there is a class called How to Be a Prayer Warrior for Your Family in Dark Times, and it's just chock full of tools and resources. So if you're saying this episode has been great, you're going to want to head over there to just grab some more.
Well, that would be great. And I want everybody to get this book, Desperate Prayers, and let Rachel walk you through how to respond to those desperate situations, those dark situations in your life. But I also want you to come back next time, because we're going to see a powerful change in this story in the second part, and you're not going to want to miss it.
Can I just remind you that each of these stories from the Bible is absolutely true. Rather than giving us a list of facts to memorize about himself, God gave us a book filled with stories, and each one helps us to know him and to understand this overarching story that we are all in. So I hope that you'll take some time looking at this story in your Bible. To help you study, I've put together my free Live Like It's True workbook, which includes my false narratives watch list, my story elements bookmark, and more. Live Like It's True is part of the Resound Podcast Network. For more gospel-centered resources, visit resoundmedia.cc. We've got that link for you, along with links to any of the other resources that we've mentioned in the show notes. Thanks so much for joining me, and now it's time to go live like it's true.